Good afternoon. Welcome to everybody. I know many of you would rather be sitting outside in the sunshine, but I'm delighted that you've chosen to come to this discussion of a very important, interesting, very readable new book by Lord Meghnad Desai. And I say Lord Meghnad Desai because I'm going to you're a person of enormous familiarity with Indian politics and Indian history, but also the British Parliament. So from Raisina Hill, the perspective, Raisina Hills, the land feature on which Rashtrapati Bhavan, the President's House, stands in New Delhi. And it's a perspective looking at 70 years of Indian democratic history. So it's really a comparison from the Westminster model to Raisina, what the fate of Indian democracy has been in its adoption in the 70 years. And Meghnad takes us through the whole gamut of different aspects of Indian democracy. And I hope that with my panelists, we'll be able to flesh out some of these ideas. I would like Meghnad to start, and I've requested my co-panelists to make opening remarks just for a few minutes, and then we'll have a discussion, maybe ask questions of each other, and then I'm going to leave lots of time for Q&A because I think that's always the most interesting part of a discussion. So, Meghnad, can I start by asking you, you read widely as well, and given there have been other stock takings of Indian democracy, the 70th anniversary sparking many of them, in what particular ways would you say your book makes a new contribution to that general discussion?
Yeah. Okay, I think there are three basic ideas. Since I only have 5 minutes, three will do for the time being. One is what you already referred to, is basically that India inherited the Westminster democracy. And for the first generation, I mean the entire generation from Gopal Krishna Gokhale up to Nehru, they really loved the House of Commons and Erskine May and the rules of doing business. And they very much wanted to recreate the House of Commons in India. It's the Westminster model that they very much want to recreate. Along the way, the various political fragmentation and leadership, and especially the electorate, decided they wanted their own version of democracy. And what I said is that in the 25 years hiatus between Congress losing its majority in 1989 and BJP getting single-party majority in 2014, Indian democracy got transformed. It's much more native. It's much more nativized version, which is why I call it the Raisina model, because Raisina Hills are where the democracy constructed. Secondly, I make the point that there are lots of theories of what kind of nation India is. Is it a Hindu nation, a secular, whatever it is. I have for a long time maintained this somewhat treasonable view that India is not a single nation. It's a collection of nations. Every language, every region is a nation and can be a nation anytime you want to. What has kept all these separate nations together since independence, where Pakistan failed and Sri Lanka went through civil war, is the quality of Indian democracy. It's democracy which has held this very, very quarrelsome, divisive, sort of structure together, and somehow everybody has a stake in it. And lastly, I think it succeeded more than any other democracy has succeeded in getting the poor to vote much more regularly than the middle class and rich vote. And that quality, that ultimately people look to their political activity to influence the outcome of the election in the hope that those people whom they have elected will repay, at least meet some of their promises. And of course, the people have thrown them out. The incumbency thing is they've thrown them out if they find you have not fulfilled the promises. Those three qualities are, I think, quite unique. And from the Westminster model, I think the only other democracy which has come, which I don't want to get into discussing, is the American democracy. And then there is the Indian democracy. And it's a fantastic achievement of the Indian people that they have created their own model of democracy.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to speak to that? And you've read the book, haven't you? So.
Well, yes, there's always a suspicion when you see people on the platform like us as to whether we've really read the book or simply the back page which says the answer.
But he's only read two chapters.
Is democracy. India's experiment with democracy has been unique and has been tamed and Indianized. I actually have read, as Suhel's just told you, I have read the first two chapters, and then I dipped after that. And the first two chapters are a fascinating run through history from way back and up to the modern day. And what it did for me, which is what I'm going to talk about, at least for part of my 5 minutes, if I go on for 5 minutes, is the fact that it reminded me, which I think is important, at the time when the Modi government, the Modi Shah administration, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, and Amit Shah, the President of the BJP, are running what is regarded as a cruel and Hindu nationalist, India for the Hindus and not the Muslims regime. And what these first two chapters reminded me of was something I partly knew, but you go through it very neatly, that this is history, that it's an evolving history. It's not new. They haven't suddenly popped up and said, let's do this. It was all back in at the time of independence. And you say here that the argument was that the Hindu nationalists, if Pakistan was a state for the Muslim nation within British India, why then was India not the Hindu state for the Hindu state for the Hindu nation? For many years in the 80s, 90s, we thought that the idea that Muslims should go back to Pakistan and should become second-class citizens was something that the Shiv Sena did in Maharashtra when there was a cricket match and Muslims cheered for the Pakistan side. Go to Pakistan if you want to cheer for these people. But it goes deep back into history. And then you go into secularism, and you make the point that Nehru's interpretation of secularism was the Western one of independence of the state from religion. But that it was very much a banner for the Anglophone elite, and that's now what's called Lutyens' Delhi. The Anglophone elite, and perhaps of which our friend over there is a prime member.
Considering that you lived in golf links and I live in Gurgaon, that's a bit rich. Typical white man view of fake news.
But you have 5,000 square feet in
No, 6,000. Again, your facts are wrong.
and with your mother,
Why don't you just finish your 2-chapter treatise and let's get on with some intelligent discussion.
We've done this before. The Anglophone Nehru elite, now represented by the Lutyens' Delhi, a superficial external stance rather than deep conviction. And that's what's now coming back. And that, I think, is an important reflection on what's happening now in India. And then there's an interesting point here also on the long battle against secularism, being a movement for othering Indian Muslims. And that, again, is what's come back into the mainstream. The other point I want to briefly talk about is something which gets just 7 words in the book.
But what words?
But what words? Just wait for it while I find it. I've got it here. The Aam Aadmi Party is dismissed as another new party. The AAP is free of family relations. So actually, it has been accused of nepotism since you wrote the book. This is another reflection on Indian politics. And I may be in a minority on this platform in arguing this. The Aam Aadmi Party, the common man's party, the ordinary people's party, emerged out of an anti-corruption campaign in Delhi around 2010, 2012, and was then elected to be the Delhi government. Though running the Delhi government is not a very simple thing because Delhi is not a proper state, a fully qualified state. And it's partly run by the Home Ministry through the Lieutenant Governor, and it's partly run by highly corrupt municipal corporations. The Aam Aadmi Party has never been given a fair chance. Okay, they've shown an awful lot of they were supposed to be non-corrupt, clean, a new way of governing, but they've never been given a chance because the BJP, with the connivance of the Congress, after an initial experiment, have been determined to make this government not work. to make the AAP not an effective government, to try and wipe it out off the face of Indian politics. Because the idea of a new party coming in and breaking which isn't regional. I mean, the regional parties are different because they're based on language, they're based on religion, they're based on other regional things. This party came in on an anti-corruption platform and had to be killed. And that's what the BJP has tried to do. In fact, Modi and his government, through the Home Ministry, have been more interested in trying to kill off the BJP, trying to kill off the AAP, than they have in allowing the AAP to try to improve the way that India is the way that Delhi is governed. And they have tried to improve education, they have tried to improve health, they have tried to improve other things. But whenever they've tried to do something, the instruction has gone down through two pliant lieutenant governors that they should be stopped, appointments have been wiped out, budgets have been cancelled. And that is an atrocious example of the way that Indian democracy works.
Thank you. Thank you for that, John. I think this specific example of AAP in this long perspective of 70 years is an interesting one. It might allow us to compare it with other smaller parties that have attempted. There's something about the Westminster model, the first-past-the-post system, which makes it practically impossible for small new parties to emerge. And what is happening with political funding now in India, and with the new reforms that have come in, with electoral bonds that have made it absolutely opaque, the amount of money that can be given to political parties through very legitimate means, is in fact makes the playing field for small new parties to emerge practically impossible. And that's an important feature I hope we'll come back to. But now over to Dinesh.
No, what you've started saying about AAP makes me realize that actually democracy is going strong in India. The very fact that AAP would emerge in itself is an attestation to the fact that democracy works. And you're making it out as if AAP is the only one against and the rest of them are actually together. Everybody in a political system actually competes against each other. You have to use all means to compete against each other. And that's what a democracy is.
All legitimate means.
All legitimate means.
That's the
now the point is,
the Indianization of democracy.
Yes, but the point is accusations are not, here you can have the Lib Dems here accusing the Tories of actually putting them down. You have so in every country in the world this happens. But the fact is nobody actually questions democracy itself in India anymore. Everybody knows democracy has put its roots deep into the system. What has actually happened is that India has reached a stage where we're doing very well. We could have done much better. What we have not done well is because we have continued the same system for the last 78 years. We copied the Westminster model. We tried to make changes, but we made cosmetic changes. We really didn't make huge changes. Changes that should have been made to cater to the system in India, which is, first of all, it's a bottoms-up approach. The fear of balkanization in the beginning, which you bring out in your book, actually made us make a centrist state, a state where decisions at village level were taken at the center, at Delhi. It should have been a system which, when people tell me if Singapore could do it, if small states could do it, why can't India do it? And I keep on saying, because India thinks like India, a huge country. If we thought that we are 100 Singapores, we would do it a much better way. The problem is we look at it from top down. We need to decentralize, put decisions down at the district level, but the problem is the political system doesn't allow you to do that. The other is copying the election model. This is something which I've been saying for a long time. We copied the first-past-the-post Westminster model in India, and that doesn't work for India. Because what it does is, because you have the central government, you have the state governments, you have the municipalities, you have the panchayat. When you do elections to all 5, voters vote on the same issues. Water, electricity, what do I need from my... You can't have elections for 5 different elections on the same issues. You have to have national elections on national issues, state elections on state issues, and panchayat elections on panchayat issues. But you don't. So what should you have done? You should have made your national elections on a proportional representation. You should have done your state and your panchayat elections on the first past the post, because that's where the MLA or the panchayat body reports directly back to the people. That you never did. And proportional representation would have been perfect for a country like India, because what proportional representation does, it takes out from the equation all ethnic, caste, religious and other issues, because every political party would have to then every religion, every caste, every And that would have made all this get out of the equation. And that's what we didn't do. So the mistake that we have done is to copy the Westminster model and carry it till today. Not only the Westminster model of how we do our legislature and how we do it, but also the executive. Even today, decisions are made by an elite at the top, which think that the rest of the country do not have the wherewithal or the ability to take decisions. And that is the wrong way to do things. So while we have done a lot, we have a long way to go. Democracy is strong, governance is the issue. And whatever one may say, in the last 4 years, governance has come to the front. What you're trying to do is, what India lost its track in the middle is we became a jugaad economy.
Yeah.
We started doing everything, adjusting everything, and we made jugaad into something which we started becoming proud about. Whereas it's actually the worst thing that you can do a country. Frugal innovation is different from jugaad. Jugaad was what we did because it's the same political system which pervades our economy, which is that you adjust among each other. You bring in a few MPs from there, few MLAs from there. The whole thing is jugaad doesn't work. You have to work. Ad hocism is something which kills a country. What you need to do is to bring systems back into place. And the last 4 years, whether we like it or not, and I'm not a BJP supporter or a Congress supporter, but the last 4 years has at least seen systems being put into place. Systems where you can look at the rule book and know what it is that you expect. You take discretion out of the way. And that is how we have to move forward.
Thank you. Just to add to this translation from Westminster to Raisina, which you start the book with, Meghnad, I mean, it is worth considering that a UK parliamentary constituency is 1/20th the size of an Indian parliamentary constituency. So an Indian parliamentary constituency is vast, and to have the same idea of one member of parliament for this vast area, which of course gives rise to all sorts of middlemen and nayaneta, they've been called all kinds of fixers, the mediation that's required for an MP to connect with their parliamentary constituency is practically impossible. And therefore the kind of money that we are now seeing, and we must talk about elections, we won't get into first past the post versus proportional representation, but I think what democracy's meaning has come to become for voters because of the electoral system is something that we can return to. But over to you, Suhel.
So one Elliott wrote great poetry when he was alive. The other Elliott reads prose poorly. Alexander Pope famously said, "With forms of government let fools contest. That which is governed best is best." You know, this whole thing about democracy, blah, blah, blah. When you abuse your leadership and you believe your leadership is letting a country down, it is you who've been part of the electoral process in getting them into power. So the mirror that we need to hold is unto ourselves to figure out what kind of democracy are we creating for ourselves. John Elliott makes this point repeatedly, as most people living in golf links do, about Lutyens' Delhi. I think this government has smashed Lutyens' Delhi nice and proper, which is why John is back in central London. The second point which I wish to make, and Meghnad referred to it, is, and I have a slight disagreement with Meghnad, who I never disagree with because he was kind enough to emulate my hairstyle, is that I don't think India is many nations. India is a composite nation with several identities, which have their moorings in culture, which if you spread across, has various verticals. Where is democracy in India today? Yes, John refers to it and talks about the Aam Aadmi Party and the subjugation of the Aam Aadmi Party. But again, partial news, partial pregnancy. The Aam Aadmi Party was founded out of a corruption crusade run by a man called Anna Hazare. It wasn't run by Arvind Kejriwal. It was a movement called India Against Corruption, from which emerged a political need, which, by the way, the founder, Anna Hazare, did not want. He did not want a political emergence out of a cause-driven movement. But that happened. Is Aam Aadmi Party playing victim? Of course. Are they being victimized? Maybe. Where is democracy in India today? I think the fact that we can dissent, the fact that there is discourse, the fact that there is discussion, bodes very well for a country like India, which has several opinions and many, many North Korean type television channels. The second, and Dinesh referred to it in his opening remarks, is that when you talk of democracy, democracy isn't a plateau. It's a form of participative government and governance that also evolves with the times. There is no question that in the last 4 years, processes have been strengthened. Transparency has been introduced. Yes, there is a lot of noise, and just not noise, there have been absolute rogues who have tried to communalize various situations and have communalized various situations. And I hope and believe that the judiciary and the press will stand up to this nonsense. I have often myself tweeted, written about it, that the Prime Minister needn't be silent anymore. Silence in India is often seen as condoning this kind of rude, roguish behavior. Where are we as a country today? We are perhaps the world's, not perhaps, we are the world's youngest democracy. More and more people are moving towards what I call the skills space, because our education system also has to be overhauled. It's a legacy of a country that we are now in. We also need, to my mind, a more participative form of citizenry. The problem with India is if your taps run dry, everyone blames the Prime Minister. Mukulika talks about parliamentary representation. It's a fact that if you look at India's parliament today, 67% are what I call within the circle of nepotism. 67%. They're either someone's sons, daughters, daughters-in-law, brothers-in-law, whatever they are. Are we changing that? Yes. Is the Modi-Shah machine completely unbeatable? No. The recent by-polls have suggested that people are tiring of a tirade that has its origins in communalism. And people are looking at development. People are looking at governance. When Dinesh talks about governance being the pivot on which democracies must rest and function, we are seeing that today. There is greater transparency, and I can talk to you from a world which is from an industry point of view. Today, no industrialist can or needs to call on governments for the simple reason they won't do anything. The chambers of commerce have moved from policy to becoming event managers because they're not required to do anything. Policy is being created not in conjunction or in order to pander, but in what's right for India. What's wrong with our democracy today? Which is wrong with every democracy. Sometimes democracies, in the shrillness of their noise, lose the purpose of reason. Have we lost that? Many a time we have. What else is wrong with our democracy? Mukulika talks about money. I think the day we will see a transparent and reformed India is when we suck out the cash from our election process. It is that cash which tempts people to be corrupt, and they are corrupt. Are we seeing the rule of law being all pervasive? Yes. Nowhere, not once in the history of India till now, has a former finance minister been prosecuted, as is being today. Is it political vendetta? The courts will decide. What else is troubling me as a citizen of India? What troubles me is that the pace of reform must match the aspirations of the youth. The worst kind of electorate is the one that is indifferent. It's not about engaged or enraged. Indifference is what needs to be stamped out. And I think what we've seen in the last 4 years is a more engaged discourse. Social media has had its role. Television has had its role, both negative and positive. Yes, there are people who've raised their voices about, subjugation of the press, blah, blah, blah. Those need to be addressed. But to say that everything is wrong with Indian democracy or that the idea of India has failed, no. The idea of India can never fail only because of what Meghnad started with. The nationhood concept is drawn from an affinity with the idea of India, with the core of India, with its values, with its cultural moorings. It is not defined by geographical borders. And I will end by referring you to a book which was written by this Japanese gentleman called Kenichi Omei many, many years ago. He was the managing partner of McKinsey in Japan. And the book was titled A Borderless World. And in a borderless world, it's not technology that eliminates borders. It's development that inspires you to be borderless and yet retain nationalism, national identity, and pride of belonging. All those are still safe. Have a splendid afternoon.
Thank you, Suhel, for your speech.
You're always welcome. Someone has to do the right thing.
I think before, I'm going to open it up to questions sooner than you expected, because I'm sure there are questions here, and I hope you will challenge some of the things you've heard, because I'm sure not everybody agrees with everything that's been said. But may I just go back to, I want to keep the focus on Meghnad's book of the Westminster to Raisina transformation. Now, it is worth noting, I've said this about parliamentary constituencies, it is worth noting that elections have transformed in meaning in the 70 years that since they were first held. 1950 was the first election when the Election Commission is set up in 51, and elections are held in 52. It is what elections have been in India and what they have become and will be in 2019 have been radically transformed. So Yogendra Yadav was talking earlier in London at a workshop, and he summed it up by saying, well, there is 3 M's that have transformed it. There's money, media, and management. And there is a professionalization of election management, where we now have panna pracharaks. Do you know what panna pracharaks are? So pannas are sheets. Voters list of a polling booth is about 20 pages. People are given, cadres are given 1 page of a voter's list to try and persuade those 20, 30 people on that list to bring them in to vote for the party. There is a certain professionalization of election management that has come in. And very importantly, we've talked about electoral funding, but very importantly, a very little realized fact is that the ballot is no longer totally secret. The secret ballot is one that really gave meaning. The reason why your point number 3 of the ability, India's success in bringing its poor in to have faith in the electoral system, to a large extent hinges on the secrecy of the ballot. But because now polling data is available per booth publicly, you can tell how a population of 1,200 to 1,500 people voted in a breakdown. That is not secrecy. If you're on the ground anywhere, you can tell who's voted how. So, and people don't realize this, the most educated, the most proficient commentators of Indian politics don't realize it. If the secrecy of the ballot has been compromised in Indian politics, and there is a solution waiting in the wings that has been resisted by political parties, and I think as citizens we have some responsibility to mobilize to bring it in. Meghnad, did you want to respond to any of the points that are being made, or do you want to take questions?
Yeah, no, let me just say one or two very small things. I think, it is now possible to say, oh, PR would have been better. But, proportional representation was not on the agenda of any political system at that time.
Yeah.
As far as, I may be wrong in footnotes, but I'm not wrong in the large fact. Secondly, there is no constraint of the Indian parliament increasing in size. I have myself written about it. Let us say that there should be 1 MP per million voters.
Yeah, that's 1,200.
There were 800 million voters in 2014, and there are only 545 seats. And I have proposed it because there has been a proposal for 1/3 being women. I've said basically what you do is you say 1/3 should be women, but rather than hurt the poor men from losing their seats, just add those seats and make it. So let's say you go from 545 to 1/3 is about 180, so that gets you to about 70. But no. Let's make it 900 so that 300 will go to women and 600 are open to either gender to be competing. Because there is no reason why we should not have 900 MPs. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And I know it will need different kind of procedures and so on. And I work in a parliament, and I know it's quite a difficult thing to do. But there is no reason why we should be stuck at 545. We are out at 545 by increasing it, but there's a big lag. There's no reason why, just as we have a Union Finance Commission, there should be a quinquennial parliamentary commission which will come to the decision that these many seats are needed, that's it.
Lord Desai, we don't need to go up to 900. There are 712 districts in India today. We have a situation where our
There are 720 seats?
712
12 districts.
districts in India.
Oh, districts, okay.
Now, 712 districts should mean 712 MPs because your administrative division and your legislative division needs to be the same. Because right now you have one MP having 4 districts or 3 districts, where it creates a problem. If you have your administrative division as well as your legislative division, it makes all the sense in the world.
If you start redrawing the boundaries as well as increasing the number,
They'll be
all hell will break loose. Anyway,
It's
okay, well, let me
One quick answer from you. There has been talk of having common elections. What's happening is India is always in election mode, either at the state or the center. What are your views on that?
Well, I very much have been for it.
Don't answer his question. Say what you want to say.
I tell you.
We've not been asked to discuss the
I
book.
was going to say something else, which is related to that question. See, one of the things which happens in India is no matter which government is in power, it may be 4 years or 5 years, but it is re-looked at every 6 months. Because somewhere or other there is an election, right? So there's a by-election, there's a regional election. So it's like a continuous sort of popularity poll on the central government. Nobody cares who's elected in the states, That is the minor stuff. Everybody knows states have, not much power. As long as they get money from the center, they'll be all right. Now, the proposal that we should have a single voting period, which was the case in 52 and 57 and 62 and 67.
Exactly.
I mean, it is nothing new for us. Would require that we depart from one basic tenet of the Westminster system, which is that a government which does not command the confidence of the legislature can be thrown out. Now, I mean, in that case, what we have to do to discourage misuse of that thing, should say that if a government is thrown out, that there'll be no new government formed until the due date of election.
So there's no government until the next election.
It's president's rule.
President's rule.
Okay, I mean this is not a perfect solution. Or you say, hey, why do we need elections? Just one election. The whole joy is to have elections every 6 months or every 3 months or every 4 months, which in a sense, as I said, there is an information content to that, which is a continuous, ballot, or live ballot on the government in power. Just one more thing I would say, that the most remarkable thing, I think you said, maybe Mukulika said, when we started in 1947, provinces were very powerful. And they had a lot of independence. And the provincial chief minister was called the prime minister of Punjab, and so on, because there was no central government at that time. There were independent provinces. We moved to much more central because of partition. Because balkanization was the biggest fear of that generation. And one thing I start by saying that the greatest achievement of the Indian democracy is that it has lasted longer than many other republics, including in particular the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did not last as long as India has lasted, nor did Yugoslavia. We have to understand that, staying together as a single entity is a much bigger achievement which we cannot take for granted. There is no, all the unity of India and all that, I know all that. But during my lifetime in the 50s, we were all convinced that the South was going to secede. And there was a speech made by Anna in the Anna DMK person saying, it's not going to be painful partition, we will have to leave you, we love you very much, but the South cannot live with the North. This was 1962.
65, right.
And then the Chinese solved that problem.
Which is true.
When we lost to the Chinese, everybody decided that India had to stay together. Even in the deepest south, we cared about the Aksai Chin, whereas Nehru said, not a blade of grass grew. Well, so that, that is, the tension is there. And we have to appreciate that, don't take anything for granted. Everything like the unity, like the democracy, you have to work at it day in and day out. And everybody has to work for it.
And many in this audience might, in fact, fear that what is happening in India today is precisely those ideas that we seem to have a constitutional commitment to, that we can see as the essence of the unity and diversity of India, are precisely the values that are under threat, but maybe not. We'll see when the questions come in. I think what I really valued about Meghnad's book, and I did read all chapters, but you know, academics are like that. But one thing I will say about the, before I tell you what I really liked about the book, was a lot of academic research goes on about the issues that we are discussing here. There's a recent piece by Devesh Kapoor in Indian Express, in the same column that you write, Meghnad, which addresses this issue of simultaneous elections brilliantly. And I think that should inform this exchange. But I think this, you know, the formulation you have of the constitutional and the agitational together being at the heart of the Raisina model is an important one. The second one is how the colonial period, actually even the very partial Government of India Act of 1935, it might have been partial democracy, which is the story we always tell. But you make a very interesting point that in that process, there was experience of legislation, of behaving as legislators that Indian politicians gained, that then fed into the Purna Swaraj that then eventually came in 1947. And you talk about balkanization and the South, but you also, I think, you know, this is again, especially for younger generations, is important to remember that the real threat after independence was a communist revolution. The threat of yeah, no, well, I mean, real communists, you know, the communist parties of India were powerful and engaged and part of
the peasant revolution in Telangana.
Yes, indeed. So I think
Can I just come back to the point about the constant elections and that issue? I mean, it's just a thought rather that has become an issue, a live issue, under the current national central government. And the reason it's become that is the BJP is so determined to spread itself across the country and to spread itself throughout, so it can be seen to have emerged from just being in one or two states. And so that's the ego side of it.
Yeah, but you know,
the practical side of it is that they want to get a majority in the Rajya Sabha because that's the upper house. Because unless they get that majority, they can't get a lot of their legislation through.
And they also,
so there's much more. Hang on, there's lots more. If I may, to the moderator.
Sure, yeah.
There's lots more focus on this than there usually is. I mean, I'm just thinking vaguely back through the 25 years I've lived there. I don't remember this focus on elections being nearly so great, and part of the reason is that the Prime Minister himself becomes the chief electioneer for his party, and doesn't leave it to the chief ministers. And therefore appears not to be governing. I mean, the flip thing will be half the time, a third of the time he's abroad, a third of the time he's electioneering. We don't know what he does for the other third.
He's reading your columns.
Yoga.
If I make a joke, Suhel is bound to come in. Suhel.
No, we're going to take
the balance of the time he's reading your columns to see how he can govern better.
And watching you on television in one of those little boxes that you and Meghnad share.
No,
two hairstyles.
I'm sorry, I'm
both
going
on
to
the
now,
screen at the same time.
Correct.
Can I say one thing about this and then I'll
literally
stop?
one thing in 30 seconds. Yeah.
If you read the Constitution, it's written on the implicit assumption that only one party will be in power at the center and in the states, and that was Congress. You didn't have to worry about this in the first four elections.
No, of course not.
They were at the same time because one party was so dominant that party was never going to be removed. In 1967, that assumption fell apart.
Yes, but the Constitution was not written for the Congress Party. I mean, it was a
No, but it was written by the Congress Party.
Well, I mean, sorry, I work at the LSE, which is, Ambedkar is our most famous alumnus, and I don't think the Ambedkar's complete allegiance at that stage
well,
was,
we will
it was a
come
more
to that
varied
later on.
range of opinions.
But let's discuss Meghnad's book here. Why go to Ambedkar?
Yeah, you haven't read it, Suhel, but these are in the book. I mean, okay, so let's
questions.
Let's take some questions. Yeah. Okay, so let's take this young gentleman in the front.
You should have taken the mic.
Age discrimination?
No, it's just a identification way. I could say pale blue shirt, which might be more correct. I apologize. Yeah, please.
Milind Vaishnav wrote a very good book recently on criminality in Indian politics.
Sorry?
Can you hear me? Milind Vaishnav wrote
Yes.
a very good book on criminality in Indian politics very recently. Do any of you have any views as to whether Indian democracy would be strengthened if Indian parliamentarians with criminal convictions were disbarred from standing in Parliament?
I have very strong views, but let's take another question. We'll come back to that. Well, let's take this. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yes.
I've had my hand up first.
There are people ahead of you, believe me. Yeah.
Okay. Zari Masani, I'm a historian. I just want to pick up on what you said, Mukulika, about the 1935 Constitution, because I think it's very important. It actually enfranchised 30 million people, which was one of the largest electorates in the world, and it gave them experience of running provinces virtually as autonomous provinces with much greater powers than the states have today. And I think we need to go further back to the 1860s, to the municipal self-government, which the British introduced with the cooperation of Indian city fathers, which gave enormous experience to Indian politicians who later went on to lead the nationalist movement. On the question of proportional representation, it was in the air. My father, who was a Congress member of the Constituent Assembly, moved a resolution for it. The Congress leadership defeated it because they wanted a majoritarian first-past-the-post system. Had it been adopted, my question to the panel is, do you think we might have avoided partition? Because it would have given the Muslims proportional representation as opposed to the 2%. Today, they have 2% of the seats in Parliament, 22 seats out of 640 or 540. But it's 2% as opposed to 18%, which is their share of the population.
This is painful. Can I answer it as shortly as I can?
Please do.
First of all, that was after the partition, the Constituent Assembly decisions.
Yes.
Partition already had happened. What it needed was something like what we nowadays call consociational democracy, which Mukulika will know about, which is what we what we the British adopted in Northern Ireland when we had the Good Friday Agreement, in which each community had to vote on the Good Friday Agreement, and it had to secure majority in each community. Communities were treated as autonomous thing. Now, I think it would have required, first of all, something which was implicitly there, that, just as there is a Dalit votes and there is tribal thing, and there should be reserved seats for Muslims. But Congress had throughout rejected it from the Motilal Nehru report onwards. I mean, I could go on, so I will not go on.
Sure.
I'll stop here.
Okay.
Yes, but it would not have stopped partition because this happened after the partition.
Okay. Suhel, do you want to do a criminality question?
No, only on the criminal thing. It has come up several times. The flip side is that a lot of political parties lodge cases against people in order for them to have a criminal record, but those cases never see the light of day. The solution, therefore, and it's a very important question. I've said, I mean, not just me, hundreds of people have said, including Elliott, that we need to set up fast-track courts which only look at political cases or cases involving politicians, therefore either barring them or disbarring them from elections. I'll give you a small example. Look at Lalu Yadav, who's now in jail. It took 26 years for conviction to lead to imprisonment. In between, he served 2 terms, his wife served 1 term, and his son tried to serve half a term. I mean, so, that's how it is.
Yeah.
So if you talk about nepotism, I mean, it was literally Rabri Devi, his wife, who was put there while he was managing the state from prison. So it doesn't solve the problem. There's no point having a successful operation with the patient dead.
And thinking of one current case, if the son has got a possible criminal record, does that stop the father standing too?
No, because we're not talking about illogical stuff here. This is a very intelligent audience which is looking at logic.
We're talking about the guy who you mentioned earlier.
No, see, this is the problem. That's why you had to come back. Now, India's far too smart for tolerating journalists with fake news.
Let's keep it to the issues. Let's take some more questions. There's one on the side there, on the lady.
He doesn't like being
in black.
You're young and old.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rajeshwari. I just have a question about like what you guys were saying earlier about just democracy. There was a lot of talk about democracy at one point and how whether that is strengthened or not by the current system. And I just think, you know, what you said was that democracy is strengthened because even though there is like a lot of communal politics and like a lot of criminal convictions in the political system and all of these things, there is a lot of dissent, and that was a sign of democracy. But I just think, for democracy to actually function, there need to be systems in place that do not silence minorities. And most minority voices, not just, this is not just about Muslims, this is not just about religious minorities, it's about a lot of minorities. Linguistic minorities, for example, you mentioned Telangana at one point. The systems in place themselves, this is outside of the Prime Minister being silent on certain issues that the entire nation is aware of. The systems in place are themselves silencing these voices, and the media, which is supposed to convey.
What's the question? What is the question?
You've spoken more than all of us. You've spoken. Just tell us the question.
I think what you're getting to is the lack of dissent in democracy. If the media is been silenced or has been bought up, then what kind of dissent and dissenting voices? Thank you. Okay, so we'll take it there. I'll take it as that is the question, and you agree. Let's take another question here on the right, at the back, with the orange band on the wrist, is what I can see. Can you raise your... Can you raise your hands high so the ushers can see you, please? Thank you.
Thank you for that discussion. That was very interesting. With the upcoming elections in 2019, what do you think is the future of the Congress Party and Rahul Gandhi?
Okay.
And
let's take one more. This
Future for Congress
red shirt
Party, Rahul
gentleman.
Gandhi.
Yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion. I have two questions. So first is that if you look at some other sort of governance models around the world, so China with its state capitalism has clearly become extremely successful and now rivals US. So how is that being viewed in India? And the second is also that some of the tech companies, especially Google and Facebook, have become extremely powerful, and their ability to manage voters' choices, it has become quite evident in the Western elections over the last 2 years. I am living here and I receive a lot of WhatsApp messages when elections are happening in India. So how is the Indian government and the Indian politicians looking at these sort of entities and their relationship with them?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's just go to each of you and you can respond or not respond to any of the three questions.
Yeah.
So there was dissent, Rahul Gandhi, and China and data.
I don't live in India, I live here. I write columns in Indian newspapers and so on, and I do visit India. I see no evidence of there not being enough dissent. Because, you look at the social media, and my God, it's a jungle out there of abuse from all sides. I have been abused by all sides, because sometimes I'm for BJP, sometimes I'm not for BJP, and the abuse you get is amazing. So what is happening is that there is a lot of dissent, and dissent which used to be quiet at a street corner now is amplified. Now you get certainly 1 million hits because you have said, oh, these Muslims are terrible. Suddenly you get 1 million hits. So I don't think that in India there is no way any government can ever suppress dissent. Indira Gandhi found that out. You had one good experience of fascism, and that failed. Don't forget that. We have had fascism in India, and that was Indira Gandhi's emergency. She put all opposition leaders in jail.
Can you say about the media, Meghnad?
Sure.
Do you think the media is totally independent in India?
I don't see... Okay, television is a medium that, Suhel understands more, but, they can't make money. They can't make money, so they have to be dependent upon government favors. But, there's proliferation of newspapers. There's lots and lots of things going on. And I still have to see any opinion so suppressed in India that you can't read about it. Okay, I may be naive and, but it is fashionable to complain, because the same thing used to happen when Congress was in power, but nobody was there to complain. Okay, so the third question was
Rahul Gandhi.
All I can say, let the Indian people decide. I think it may be, okay, to make this point, it may be that Congress could turn out to have 3-digit number of seats, which is not bad. From 44 to 100 is a real move. And it may be that the Mahagathbandhan, the grand coalition of 17 parties, perhaps led by Mamata Banerjee, but perhaps not, may get 250 seats. But my gut feeling is that the NDA coalition will get there, but BJP may not get a single party majority.
Starting off with that question, I think it's more a question of how well Rahul Gandhi and the Congress manages to work with the other parties, because if they, and this is not very original, you'll all have read it, if they carry on behaving as they have in the past, thinking they rule, then they're not going to get very far and the thing will crumble. But if they can somehow, as they did in Karnataka, to begin with at any rate, begin to realize that they don't have, that they are no longer born to rule, that life has finished, then I think there's a chance. On the media, yes, of course, I agree with everything you've just said. And then, of course, there is huge concentration of ownership of the media. But hey, on television, we have these two curly-haired gentlemen every night telling us exactly what all their friends are getting wrong. I mean, how can they... Who cares about freedom of the media with these two on television in their little boxes telling us how the country is being run so badly?
So Cobra Sting
I feel
is
so
a
sad
non-story.
for John that he's never invited.
Well, we've had a big story on the Cobra Sting story, and I hope Suhel will talk about it. Dinesh, could you respond to the question about China and data? Should India have had...
Technology is changing the way we run democracies, run elections. But the point which we made just now, the 3 M's, media management and election management and money, has actually reached a stage where technology is used everywhere. I asked somebody in India that when Cambridge Analytica wound up, whether anybody of you used it, they said, we have better systems than Cambridge Analytica in India today.
Exactly.
But the point is, technology is to be used. I don't take this thing that hacking or technology from outside can actually subvert a democracy. They're being subverted every day. I mean, we come down to dissent. Dissent is in every street in India. If you ever travel by bus in Calcutta or by train, long journeys, you'll realize the dissent in a small compartment or a cabin. Everybody has a different opinion. Hundreds of opinions every day. What's happened today is because of social media, it's exploded. You hear it every day. Earlier, you didn't hear it because the media didn't actually propagate this in the way it is being done today. So what you're seeing dissent all over the place is actually social media exploding. And half the time, you don't know whether it's correct or not correct. But that is the strength of democracy, to be able to have multiple views and take your decision at the end. So this whole thing about technology actually coming in to subvert democracy is something which I don't buy.
China?
China, well, you said success. Now, success depends on what parameters. If it's economic success, yes. We are talking about democracy here. Now, that I don't have to tell you.
No, I should add that I have a chapter on the economic performance of India and why it is not as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
So do read the book. You don't have to buy it, just read it.
First, I must apologize to you for cutting you, but that wasn't the intent. But to answer your specific question, media ownership, yes, ownership of media has been concentrated in a few hands from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Now you're seeing entrepreneurs getting into the media domain. Is it lucrative? I don't think so. Where are they making money from? God alone knows. Is the media biased? It always has been. There have always been newspapers that have supported one line of thinking or one political dispensation. To my mind, the essential question is the consumer / the citizen getting smarter to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff? He or she. People are able to recognize what is propaganda and what is truth. People have enough sane voices. There's one sitting right here, Javed Saab. There are enough sane voices in India. I don't think we are nearing Armageddon or, an underground tube failure that we need to be so worried and so alarmed. Khushro Irani, who used to run The Statesman, which was a venerable newspaper in Calcutta, once said, the press in India is as free as it chooses to be. L.K. Advani, in 1977, when he became the INB minister, said, "Why does the press in India crawl when asked to walk?" To quote Shakespeare, the fault lies in ourselves, not in our stars, that we allow this subjugation. To answer the Rahul Gandhi question, a lot of people make fun, a lot of people trivialize. I don't think Rahul Gandhi is stupid. Even if you spend that kind of time living across your life with the family that you've lived in, even you will imbibe something. So, to say he's stupid, no. What is the problem with Rahul Gandhi or the Gandhis, to my mind? I think there's a problem of entitlement and there's a problem of we know best. But there's also another problem. No one wants within the Congress to challenge the leadership, not because they're Gandhi, but there's another G. They're the glue. If they disappear from the scene, the Congress will be further divided. And everyone recognizes that, including the so-called stalwarts within or in the Congress party. Over the last 1 year, Rahul Gandhi has made 3 important strides. Stride number 1, he has tried to play the BJP at its own game, which is to counter social media abuse / humor with social media abuse / humor. So it's a level playing field. Number 2, the only abbreviations or slogans that have stuck to the Modi government have been the ones that he has mouthed. Soot Boot Ki Sarkar, Gabbar Singh tax. You will not hear any of Modi's slogans, reverberating. So both these guys are now getting into what I call the advertising space. Number 3, what he's done is he's recognized that you can be the chairman of the board without being the CEO, something that his mother did with great aplomb. So I don't think we need to rule out anything. And I will end with just one point on this issue. And Meghnad is here, Dinesh is here, who obviously know India better than most people. Other than Nehru, India has never predicted a future prime minister. Think about it. We have never predicted a future prime minister. Even during the Modi time, everyone thought Advani will come in. No one realized that Advani would go to the CBI court every day and Modi would be in Racecourse Road. But that's par for the course. On the China and data thing, it is very clear that both Facebook and Google are now on the mat. The Indian Information Technology Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad, almost Shakespearean-like, spoke in the third person himself on national television when he says, Zuckerberg, remember India's IT minister will never let that happen. I almost searched for a shadow of Banco's ghost but found none. It was the Indian IT minister. Is technology being used? I worked on Mr. Vajpayee's personal campaign in 1999. We were using research and analytics even then. We didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Google. Mukulika mentioned, to my mind, which is an eye-opener, and thank you, Mukulika, for that. I didn't know this polling data was so detailed and so available. It makes marketing much, much easier. Will political parties use it? Of course they will.
They are.
And they are. And why shouldn't they? As long as these tools are legal, and as long as they have access to these tools either through money or knowledge, they will use them. If you make them illegal, they'll vanish. Luckily, we don't have yet either Putin or Theresa May God bless her, or Erdogan or Trump interfering in the Indian election. No, in the Indian election. See, that's the other problem. No one allows people to finish.
Suhel, can I?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me use the last minute we have, just 30 seconds actually. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. But I'm sure panelists will be available for conversation. The secret ballot thing, because it's so critical, it's worth thinking about. It's not as if it's not legal. The point is we had paper ballots to start with, and they used to be mixed in a drum at the counting center. So, it's like shaking the box. And the ballots were mixed before they were counted. Now with EVMs, and I don't have a problem with EVMs before you think that, every EVM is counted EVM by EVM. So you need to have an electronic mixing machine, which we didn't have to start with. But now the Election Commission of India has a mixing machine called the totalizer, which is, it could come up with a better name, Suhel should suggest one. But there is a machine. But this government and several political parties have resisted it. And I have directly asked members of the cabinet about this, and they said, and the euphemism that's used is brilliant. He says, it interferes with booth management. So I leave it, and I really think as citizens who vote, who care about Indian democracy, I feel this is probably a one-point agenda that we should be demanding our rights. But it remains for me, as like Lady Macbeth, I think, in your Shakespearean drama that you've been conducting, is always to thank my co-panelists and to thank you as the audience. Thank you.